Hey everyone, I'm Abby with Spiceworks, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Spiceworks Partner Webinar, SMBs and the Threat of Unsecured Mobile Devices, brought to you by Marble Security. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that the webinar will be recorded, so if you have to step away for any reason, you will get an email with a link to that video in about a week. Also, we want your questions, so be sure to log those into the question box at any point during the presentation, and our presenter will try to answer as many as he can along the way and also allow for some time at the end of the presentation. So now that we all have the housekeeping done, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today. We have David Jevons, and he is the founder and chairman and chief technology officer for Marble Security. Dave currently serves as the chairman of the Anti-Phishing Working Group, a consortium of more than 1,500 financial services companies, ISPs, law enforcement agencies, and technology vendors dedicated to fighting crimeware, email fraud, and online identity theft. So Dave, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thank you so much, Abby, and everyone, welcome to today's webinar. At any time, if you have questions or comments, I welcome them. You don't have to save them to the end, unless that's how you'd like to do it. We're going to talk today about the risks of mobile devices to your business, what you can do about them, and I'm also going to give you some very fresh new research around attacks against the iPhone and iPad at the end of the presentation, so do stick around for that. It's interesting. When we look at the trends in business, particularly in small and medium business, but it's also coming in the large enterprises as well, people want to use their own devices to access corporate email, access the address books, access apps that connect into the company, or access web services that companies might be using, such as Google Apps or Salesforce.com. And this is a trend that, of course, is not going away. However, what research is showing is that user-owned computers and smartphones are more than twice as likely to be infected with malware than corporate-owned devices, which have an IT staff that's managing them, that's locking them down. In fact, if you look at advanced persistent threats, and we'll talk more about APTs shortly, but advanced persistent threats are targeted attacks against you or your employees, even if you're a small company, and 45% of enterprises in a recent survey are seeing an increase in APTs, and almost all of them involve some form of spear phishing attack against users. So this might be one email, two emails, four emails that are sent in targeting employees, and they get their information from your website. They get it from LinkedIn or Facebook. That's how they're targeting employees. And employees on mobile devices are far more likely to respond to these types of attacks. Now let's look at the top 9 threats against folks who are using mobile devices. Malware, we'll talk about Android malware and iOS malicious apps. Keyloggers, compromised Wi-Fi hotspots where people are using Wi-Fi at the coffee shop, at the airport, in the hotel. Those Wi-Fi hotspots, if they're not compromised, can be compromised through poison DNS, which is upstream, but the ISP that your users are connecting onto the internet through. I'm going to talk to you a little bit and show you some examples of malicious and privacy leaking apps. So these are apps that can be found on the Apple App Store. They can be found on Google Play. Legitimate apps, but they're doing things, taking data off the user's device and sending it out to the internet where you have no control of that data. It's also a way that people are uploading address book information, which basically publishes all the information and credentials of your employees to some third-party website, which is prime fodder for spear phishing. Jailbroken and rooted devices should not be allowed on your network, and you need to be able to control if a device has been jailbroken or rooted, because effectively all security controls on that iPhone, iPad, or Android device have been effectively compromised if the user's gone and rooted it or jailbroken it. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about unpatched operating systems and the dangers of fragmentation of the operating system in Android. And we'll talk about spear phishing and other APTs. So again, if you have any questions, you can save them to the end, or you can ask them during the talk. So with that bring your own device trend, which is primarily people bringing in their own mobile devices and using them to connect to your network and your email and what have you, the problem you've got is that you don't know anything about that user's device. So they're visiting lots of different websites. They may be sharing that device with friends and family. Maybe their kids are using it on the weekend. Maybe their kid went and jailbroke their iPhone on the weekend without the parent knowing. The other thing we find with the bring your own device is that they're connecting to many different networks. And our metrics are showing users are connecting on average to about 10 different networks a month. Your work network, their home network, coffee shops, airports, even buses now have Wi-Fi. And the thing is that the attacks against end users are the main way that criminals are getting into corporate networks. They're getting their passwords to your VPNs, getting passwords into corporate systems, and from there they jump around inside of your network. And I'm going to give you some examples of recent attacks against companies to show you that companies of every scale are being targeted. One of the reasons why this is happening, particularly nowadays against users of mobile devices, is that the underground cybercrime economy has figured out that there will be 600 million people on smartphones this year, and it's growing rapidly. And so there's an entire economy of hackers that are targeting your mobile phone, your iPad, your Android device. This slide right here is from a report that the APWG published a couple of months ago that was a comprehensive study of the underground cybercrime marketplace for tools, exploits, and services that criminals use to attack mobile devices. We also studied the pricing because the criminals sell these services to each other. So some of it's free and some of it's for sale, but you can see that malware for banking theft, you might be able to sell it for between $10,000 and $30,000 a pop to a crime gang. We're finding mobile botnet rental out there where they've infected somebody's device or put a malicious app on it, and then they can control it remotely to attack other people. Those are for sale for $50 to $400 an hour. And then we're seeing a lot of malware out there, etc. A lot of mobile SMS spam services, and a lot of what we're finding is there are services out there that will get onto people's devices and then send SMS messages to international countries and drive up phone rates. So there's this entire market out there that's been evolving. Now, phishing turns out to be a pretty big problem for users of mobile devices, and phishing continues to grow. It comes in waves. So you can see here, this is a chart over the last number of years, the last 6 years, where we're seeing the number of new phishing sites discovered on a monthly basis. And they're running upwards of 300,000 websites a month that are malicious, that are targeting you or your employees. With the explosion of social networks, there's been an explosion of these sites. So the number of Facebook phishing sites on a monthly basis would astound you if I were permitted to share that information with you. But you would be amazed at it. And once somebody takes over your Facebook account. Now, they've got your password. That's quite often the same password that people reuse on their work accounts, and it's also used to attack their friends and coworkers. And we talked a little bit about spear phishing, but it appears to be the #1 way that advanced persistent threats are instigated. Spear phishing on a mobile phone is you're much more susceptible to responding to it. So there's a number of reasons why. One, you're checking email all the time. You're checking email at work, you're checking email in meetings, you check an email in the taxi, you check an email at home while you're watching a movie sometimes. So you're much more likely to actually see it and respond to it before any security researcher in your company or at a security company may have found it. Another reason is, of course, the small size of the screen. You don't have a good visibility into the validity of URLs. It's hard to tell whether it's going to a real site or not. Another reason is that it can be delivered through multiple channels. So if you're like me, you've got 3 or 4 email accounts connected to your mobile phone. And attackers can get you through any one of those channels. It's not all just coming through the corporate email channel. It also, of course, can be delivered through SMS messages, and we're seeing more of that, where targeted attacks are being delivered to users through an SMS that might say it's coming from your company, but those are almost impossible to filter out. So you've got to be able to have VPN services that no matter where the user is, what Wi-Fi they're on, how the message is delivered, that if they click on those links, which maybe take them to a phishing site, maybe take them to a site to install a malicious Android app on their phone, that those can be detected and blocked. There was a question about the phishing graph. That particular graph is from Google, so that is from the Google security team. We get data from a number of different security vendors, a number of different honeypots, and also the Anti-Phishing Working Group, which can be found at apwg.org. And the APWG does reports every 6 months of phishing trends, which is amalgamated data from a number of different sources. And in fact, this is the 10th year that we've been doing it, and we just had our 10th anniversary cybercrime conference last week in San Francisco, and I'm going to show you some of the latest information from that. Let's look at some of the implications of these security issues. Here's one from mid-August, so it was exactly a month ago. A small escrow firm was attacked, and about $500,000 of wire transfers were sent out of that account. So they basically had $1.5 million in total sent out in large chunks of about $400,000 to $500,000. This is because they got into the escrow firm and were able to get the passwords to online banking accounts and then move money out of the company's accounts. And unlike you and I as consumers who have protections in the law about theft and credit card theft, companies don't have any of those protections. They're not protected legally if somebody gets into the corporate bank account and moves money. So that money basically is unrecoverable, and the government ended up having to shut down that escrow firm because they weren't able to cover their transfer duties. Here's another example of a title insurance company that is seeing a lot of fraud and just issued this bulletin in the last couple of weeks to their customers. We're seeing a lot of attacks against email service providers. So these are small companies that folks like you and I may use to send out our emails to our customers. those folks are getting targeted with attacks at a very high rate. And what's happening there is they're getting into their systems and then sending emails out, hundreds of thousands of emails out, and those emails are malicious and get delivered to the end user because these folks are specialists in sending out emails that don't end up in spam filters. So there's quite a large attack vector against those types of companies. Here's another example where you might think, well, why would somebody want to get into my systems? Why would they want to target my users? And sometimes it's because they actually want to get after your customers or other employees and go through your company. So RSA Security experienced a targeted spear phishing attack where 4 people received an email that said, this is the list of open job recs that we have. This is what we're looking for to hire. And they clicked on those. They were infected. The criminals then spent quite some time, a number of months, poking around inside of RSA's systems. They eventually stole a database of about 40 million secure ID tokens. Within a month, RSA's customers were being attacked from that information. And in particular, we saw attacks against their government customers such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, L3, and others. And of course, the point there was not so much breaching RSA, but breaching these government contractors to then steal information about government contracts. Here's another example. This was from 2 weeks ago. The New York Times, Twitter, and another company, basically their sites were taken over by the Syrian Electronic Army. And the way that the attackers did that was they sent a small targeted email to the domain management company that manages the NewYorkTimes.com domain name. That employee gave out their information, and then that domain name was pointed at the Syrian Electronic Army's website. So you would type in NewYorkTimes.com and get taken to an SEA website. We've talked a little bit about Android and why it's a problem. Now here's some more detail. This is a map of the number of different versions, both software and hardware, of the Android platform that are available in the market right now. There's over 3,500 different combinations. What this means is that if you don't have software on your employees' devices that is scanning to make sure the operating system is up to date, has appropriate security patches installed, you stand a lot of risk of that device being compromised. And with 3,500 different combinations, you can imagine how complex that can be. You can't just say, sure, if you have an Android device, come into the network. You really do need to have a client agent on there that can scan it and ensure that it's got the appropriate security patches. If you think about all the different versions of Android and how rapidly those have been coming out every 6 months or so, and then think about all the manufacturers, they have different patch levels. They install different software on them. Users might have old versions of Android running that haven't been patched. Then the hardware also can have its own issues. So it's really created a problem in the marketplace, which is very different from the iOS environment. However, iOS, certainly people can run older versions of it, but you don't have anywhere near this amount of fragmentation. So Android, while very, very popular and growing like crazy as far as market share, has a lot of dangers around the platform. And this explains one of the reasons why mobile malicious code, which we used to call viruses but now has gotten much more criminal in its intent, has been growing at an exponential rate. In fact, different studies are showing a 700% increase in malicious code over the last 12 months. This is a more detailed study from Kaspersky Labs that is looking at malware families, not instances, and their varieties. And what you can see here is this indicates more and more criminals are getting into the business and writing completely new strains of malicious code to target mobile devices. In fact, what we've seen on Android are what we call drive-by malwares. And drive-bys are basically a person can visit a site and effectively get a piece of malicious code installed on their device simply from visiting a website. The websites check if the user's on Android, and then they send an update.apk into the browser, and Android will install that if the user's got a setting that says allow apps from unknown sources. Now, it's very easy on Android for a user to choose accept apps from unknown sources. And of course, there's more than one legitimate app store out there. It's not all just Google Play. There are Amazon and other legitimate app stores. In fact, we're monitoring over 100 different app stores and places to download free Android apps. We monitor them on a daily basis and are scanning hundreds of thousands of apps to look at what they do. Are they malicious, or are they legitimate but pose a risk to your company, and you don't want your employees running those apps if they're going to be accessing company data from their mobile device. What we're seeing as one of the main trends are people taking legitimate apps and then tampering with them and adding malicious code and then reposting them to these different app stores. This is an example here of a paid version of Angry Birds, which was modified to put malicious code in it and send passwords off the device, and then was reposted to an app store for free. And so what you'll find is people will say, well, gee, I could pay $1, $2, $10 for an app. Look, here's a free version. Lots of people go download the free version, and now their device is compromised. This is an example of a fake Instagram application. We're also seeing fake security applications out there. These are 3 different fake authentication apps pretending to be from a bank, but they're not. And they're actually out there to steal the user's password. The other thing we're finding is some of these apps will tamper with SMS so that, let's say you're using name, password, and then an SMS token to log in. And you can do that on Twitter now. You can do that on Google. You can do that on a number of banking sites. What these things do is they intercept the SMS messages and send them to the attacker. So the attacker might have your name and password, and then through one of these SMS apps, they can intercept it, get the SMS, log in, take over your account. So it's very important, if you're going to let users bring mobile devices in, that you've got an app scanning technology on the device that can look for these things, because it's not just like the old PC environment where most of the malicious code was invisible. What we're finding is on the mobile side, there's many apps that appear to be legit, but that are not. Let's talk a little bit about the network risks of mobile. We'll go through a few other examples, and then I'm going to show you the way you can take over an iPhone. So people are using all these different Wi-Fi hotspots. The fact is that on most Wi-Fis, which are unencrypted because they're at the coffee shop or what have you, anyone using that Wi-Fi can see everyone else's traffic. So they can sniff it, anything in plain text, they can take over those accounts through sidejacking and cookie session stealing. So our recommendation is that you need a VPN service for all your users on every Wi-Fi that they're on. In fact, here's an example of a tool. You can look it up for those of you who are interested in security technology. This is a tool called Cookie Cadger that lets you basically sit on a Wi-Fi network and track everybody's sessions and take over the cookies and basically sidejack their accounts. It's an industrial strength tool, works at great volume, so you can track everyone on that Wi-Fi. So for those of you who are interested, it's a much more sophisticated version than Firesheep, which was the first publicly available tool that allowed you to take over people's accounts on public Wi-Fi networks. One question is, what app scanning technology do I recommend? And, well, I'm going to recommend Marble's app scanning technology, so thank you for the softball question. But, yeah, there are a few other app scanning technologies out there on mobile devices, but we do it for both Android and iPhone platforms. Another network attack that we're seeing is poison DNS. And of course, the DNS system is the way that the internet takes the name of the website you're connecting to and turns it into a numeric address so that all the packets get routed to it through the internet. And the problem is that the Wi-Fi hotspots typically are relying on the DNS of the upstream ISP. And if you're at a Starbucks, who knows which internet service provider that is? You don't know what the DNS version is. And those older versions of DNS can be either taken over and they can change which website you go to, or they can be poisoned. So we recommend a VPN service that provides secure DNS and DNS blacklisting to prevent people from going to known malicious websites. And we've seen some pretty major DNS attacks where the entirety of Google, for example, was taken out from certain countries and routed to malicious sites. Now, DNS poisoning works not only for website users, but also for apps. So apps can be sent to a malicious site where the bad guys can, for example, get usernames and passwords or do a man-in-the-middle attack and see everything that the user's app is sending. There's a question about Windows OS on mobile devices. So we had top security folks from Microsoft at the eCrime conference last week. Here's the thing about Windows 8. We don't know enough yet. There's not enough market penetration of it. It's got very small market share, so we don't have good statistics on how criminals are attacking Windows 8 and how many malicious apps are available for it because it's just so new and small yet. My personal opinion is that it has more vulnerabilities due to its design than iOS or Android, but again, it's early days. And we're working on a Windows 8 version for app tracking and scanning and for these security services, but we don't have that out yet. So I'd say it's a little risky yet to use Windows 8 in an enterprise environment. Now let's talk about privacy leaking apps. And here's an example. This is an app that could be completely legitimate, might be a game or what have you, social networking app, available on an app store. One of your users has downloaded it and using it. Now that app can quite legitimately troll through the user's address book and upload that information to a third-party web server, third-party site on the internet. Well, if your device, like mine, is connected to Active Directory, that basically can get the names and email addresses and other information of everyone who works in your company. And now a copy of your directory is somewhere up in the internet where you have no control of it, no knowledge of it, you don't know if it's secure, you don't know if it's encrypted, and it could have gone to somebody malicious or be resold. It opens up your company to targeted attacks. So we recommend that you assess the risk of having your company's address book effectively made public. You may determine that's an acceptable risk, but you may determine that that's actually not a risk you want to take, and therefore when you do app scanning, you want to know the behavior of the apps on your user's device and be able to block them from accessing your internal networks based on the riskiness of those apps. Examples of privacy leaking apps: a number of games. Like I said, a lot of social networking, things like Viber that basically use your address book to connect with friends and promote itself to spread more virally. So any sort of viral type of app can be looking up the address book and sending it out to a service. All right, a question concerning IE and Chrome about disabling third-party cookies. Disabling third-party cookies definitely helps, but it's primarily a privacy protection for end users and will not protect you from any of these app risks. It's definitely a good best practice, but won't protect you against these types of things. The other thing we've seen is that about 45% of freely available apps upload data about you and your device to third-party advertising networks. And if you want to use that app, you have to agree that that is going to get uploaded. And that's information about you and your device and your geolocation and things in your address book. That all gets uploaded to third-party ad services. So again, back to app analysis, is important to look at that and determine the risk that you're willing to take to let users have that type of app on the device they're using to access company services and email. Well, of course, I mentioned it briefly, but you should not allow users to have jailbroken or rooted devices. There's just basically no security protections on those devices. So you need to be able to detect it with that security suite and make sure that you're not allowing these in. And we're seeing more examples of users who may not even know their device has been jailbroken or rooted because their clever teenager did it on the weekend. And the latest jailbreaks that I've seen, for example, iPhone 6.1.2 and things like that, are extremely good. So it's not obvious that your device has been jailbroken. Similarly, unpatched OS versions are a pretty big attack vector. This is true on the Windows side, it's true on the Macintosh side, and it's definitely true on mobile side. There's been a number of security patches issued recently by Google for the Android OS. One of them most recently was that older versions of Android, other than this patched version that just came out, would allow you to modify applications even if they're signed and push them out as legitimate apps, and there was no way to tell that they'd been tampered with. So let me conclude with a little demo of taking over a part of your iPad or your iPhone. So in this demo, you have to click twice, and if you have a device password, you're prompted to enter it. There's one question just about the previous slide, which is, how do you know when a user's phone has been rooted or jailbroken? Well, I think the only way to really know, other than if it's obvious that it has functionality that you've never seen before, is to have some security software agent on that. So one of the things we do is we scan for rooted and jailbroken attributes. So first thing is, let's just talk about looking at the device. If, for example, the device allows you to change background colors in a way that a normal device you bought doesn't allow, that's an indication that it's been rooted or jailbroken. If the device allows you to, for example, an iPhone allows you to download apps from places other than the App Store, that's a clear indication. There are other indications that you do programmatically when you have our security agent, where we'll do things like see if we can access parts of the operating system which are prohibited in a normal functioning iPhone or Android device. So if I can go and look, for example, from one app to another and steal any files in it, that's a pretty clear indication that the phone has been jailbroken. So hopefully that's enough answer for you. Okay, so the way we do this is we lure you to a website. This can be done through a spear phishing. Could be a website that's just up there. Might be something your friend sends you. This is an example of a real spear phishing sent to administrators at a university. This was sent on an afternoon on a weekend, and said you've got to update our spam anti-spam. So log in here with your ID. This is just one example. There are others out there. It might be something advertised in Gmail or found in Gmail, for example. But if we get you to a website, there's a thing in the iPhone called profiles, configuration profiles, and device management profiles. When you visit the website, you can basically present a profile. And the iPhone allows you to have unsigned and unverified profiles. So this one, in this example, I've called it malicious so that nobody accidentally stumbles across it and gets taken over. So this is for demonstration purposes. You're asked to install it. And again, if I put you a website that says, hey, we're fixing your spam, or it's corporate IT, we've added a new security to your mobile phone, I can get you to click install now. So all you have to do is you click install now. Now, if your device has a password set, and of course all your devices and your employees' devices need to have passwords set if they're accessing corporate email or other things, you're asked to enter your passcode. If you don't have a password set, you're already done. You're owned. But let's see what happens when you type in your passcode. In this example, what I've done is that configuration profile has turned off iTunes and replaced it with a fake one. If you look at the iTunes logo in here, I've named it iTunes-bad, just again so that people don't run into this live, because I've got this live on the internet. I don't want people to accidentally run into it and get their phones taken over. But you click on that iTunes, and it's not iTunes. In this case, I take you to a place that says, hey, you need to re-enter your iTunes information. Now, many users use the same password on multiple sites, and they might use the same password on your corporate VPN, on their other systems that you're using, your websites, your SharePoints, etc. So this is a real simple way for me to steal a user's information, get their passwords. But I can do other maliciousness now. I control iTunes. It gets worse. So these are the things that a simple configuration profile can change. You can turn off all the security settings in Safari, turn off all the phishing protection, etc. Can change JavaScript settings. So if you say, hey, JavaScript's a big risk, which it is, you can't use it, turn it off, this can turn it back on. You can allow untrusted TLS connections to malicious email servers that are intercepting email and other things. You can change a variety of device settings. There's a list of them on the left. You can install certificates on the device, which can be used to enable man in the middle. But it gets worse. If a user doesn't have a security app on their phone that's doing device management like we do, if they don't have one on their phone, I can install one of those through having them the exact same way visiting a website. That basically means total control of the phone by the bad guy. It means apps can be replaced, apps can be installed, new apps can be pushed. You can delete data, you can blow the whole phone away. You can route all traffic to man-in-the-middle sites by routing it through hostile VPNs. So these are things that a security app on the phone needs to look at. And this is very recent information, so it's something to really look at. I call it hostile profiles, but something you need to think about because your employees' devices could get taken over. I'm just going to give you a little plug for Marble's cybercrime prevention technology, and then I'm going to take a few more questions because there's some very good questions that have been lined up. And if you have more questions, now would be a good time to start typing them in. So Marble is focused on these issues. We've taken MDM, mobile device management, and expanded it to a full risk-based authentication system, which means we're looking at dynamically all of these new threats. So it's not just statically making sure that everyone has a password or that you can delete their email if they quit your company, but it's looking at app scanning, setting risk-based parameters around what type of apps you want to allow people to have on their devices, looking for privacy leaking apps, for example. We're providing network security services to defend against Wi-Fi sniffing, takeovers, sidejacking, also providing real-time secure DNS, which protects apps and web browsing. That includes anti-phishing protection, so being able to block users from visiting phishing sites no matter whether that is delivered through email or SMS to their phone or personal email. So that's the quick blurb on our cybercrime protection. I can take questions about that, but I've also got some questions around some risk issues that have come across. And certainly if you are interested in learning more, we'd love you to contact us at marblesecurity.com, and we've got experts who can talk you through the product, give you free demos, etc. But let's take a couple of questions here. How much risk is there if the mobile devices are only accessing corporate email, for example, via Exchange? Well, of course, the first risk you have is, the employee quits. You need to be able to lock their device out and turn off their access to email and delete email onto their device. So that speaks to simple MDM. But you've still got risk of infected devices or jailbroken or rooted devices because those can then access the user's credentials into email, and those, depending how you've got your network set up, those credentials may allow attackers to access your internal networks through using the same password. So, for example, if your Exchange is tied into Active Directory or what have you, they might be able to get into your SharePoint, into your VPNs, etc. Also, if the devices are jailbroken or rooted, they can certainly piggyback on VPN sessions and jump into your networks as well. Those would be the main risks. I'd also worry a little bit about if a user's device has a malicious app on it, and they bring that into the network inside the company, and you have a Wi-Fi internally, and they connect to that Wi-Fi, then you've got a malicious app inside your network, and it can start sniffing your network. It's effectively you've opened up a back door for bad guys inside your internal network. So that's one thing to think about. Yeah, so those are some examples. And then lastly, if it's connected to a directory, it could upload your employees' information. Oh, sorry, there's somebody pounding outside my window. Does Marble Security work with laptops, Mac or Windows? Yes, we do work with Mac or Windows. It's a little different as far as the full suite of its functionality. But yes, we have Mac and Windows versions. Time for a couple more questions. What's your opinion on the malicious apps that were recently published on the Apple App Store? So somebody's obviously been studying the latest security news. Let me just, for those of you who might not have heard about it, there's been some recent research where security researchers published malicious apps on the App Store, and the way they did it to get around Apple's security was they made the apps change their behavior after they were installed on your device, and depending what network you were on. So they basically function like what we call in the security industry a botnet. They would connect out from your device to a command and control center, which would tell them to change their behavior. And when Apple was testing the apps, that command and control center knew it was coming from Apple networks and didn't tell the device to do these behaviors. They waited till their app got published on the App Store, and then when it was run, it would change its behavior after being published. So it's another example of the ways that people can push malicious apps or privacy leaking apps even onto the Apple App Store, which will defy most static-based analysis and all dynamic analysis that can be done before it gets published. So you have to be scanning behavior of these apps in the wild, not just relying on Apple to pre-scan them for you. What are my thoughts on the Android master key bug? Well, that is the way that you can tamper with any legitimate app on Android. You can add code into it, and signature validation was not being correctly implemented. So yes, you could download perfectly legitimate apps that had been tampered with. Now, if you only allow users to access apps from the Android Play, your risks are relatively low, but if users have it on so that they can access apps from other app stores, which is increasingly common, then they can get a legitimate app. It appears legitimate, and that is really another reason why you've got to ensure that users are running the latest version of the operating system, because that bug has been patched, but the majority of Android users are not running that patch. Our latest scan, if you think back to that slide that showed fragmentation of the Android world, let me pull that slide up for you here. You can see that. And there are other graphs out there that show OS versions, but yeah, people need to be running the latest patched versions. Another question, do we have support for Chromebooks? Currently, no, we do not. Sorry, but maybe we will. There's another question about the risks of fragmentation. I think hopefully I've covered that sufficiently for the gentleman who asked that. There's a question about how fast does Marble Security Protection update itself against threats. Typically, we're doing constant updates of portions of it. So app scanning is happening constantly. We have a large database that we maintain. So we'll scan users' devices, check with the database that we're running, and we're constantly updating that database and scanning over 100 different app stores. Our DNS security is being updated about every 5 minutes, so it's almost real time, relatively quickly. And then we're doing automatic updates of both the software and the online service on a weekly basis. So it's evolving quickly against these attacks. One more question. This is a funny one. Is there an NSA backdoor in Marvel Security? I can categorically say that there is not. I've done work with those agencies in the past. They have never asked us to put a backdoor in, and we wouldn't. And to my mind, there's no way they can force you to do it. So no, we do not. There's a timely question. I think we've got time for one more, perhaps, one or two more if you've got them. Does our app software affect device performance? Yes, very slightly. So there's a little bit of slowdown on the device. I mean, it's actually imperceptible, but it'll burn a little bit of battery life because you're scanning the device periodically, looking at apps, or when someone installs a new app, we're looking at it and uploading information about it for analysis and risk metrics. So the main issue will be a small, like a couple % impact on overall battery life. So if your battery lasts for a day, maybe it'll last for a day minus 10 minutes or 5 minutes or so. If you're running the VPN security services with secure DNS, there's a very small latency impact to it, and again, a slight battery life, but we're talking in the orders of single-digit %, 1, 2, 3%, that type of thing. A question about license sizes. We don't have a minimum number of licenses, but I'm not the sales guy. So if you'd like to try a free trial, we'd love to accommodate, and you can find a form at www.marblesecurity.com for free trials. I think we need to wrap up. I really appreciate everybody being on this webinar, and thank you for all of your excellent questions. And are there any other housekeeping items? I don't think so. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, Dave, for a great presentation, and thanks to everyone who joined today. Just wanted to give you a reminder that you will get an email in a week with a link to the recordings. Be on the lookout for that. Everyone have a great rest of the afternoon, and we hope to see you on future webinars.